It says it's starting. Okay, we're live. This is for class Family 460-04, and it's Professor Hubert, and I'm Irma Alvaro.
And I'm Erin Westberg.
Okay, so we're going to start. There are 11 questions, and the first one is, what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? Why is the doctrine of the family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent? Well, for one thing, Wilbur was very passionate about families, and he had just discovered God and realized that in the teachings of Jesus Christ, it's that all men are created equally and they're created in the image of God. So with that understanding, he felt a real strong passion to represent the families, in particular the families at the time who were then called Negro African American families, who were slaves, and they were in the slave trade. And he saw how inhumane they were being treated. It certainly didn't depict the discipleship that he had just learned about. And so it really, that was really heavy on his mind, that there were other people that were treated in such inhumane way. So I think he felt that those families deserved to be treated fairly and to exercise their freedom. And if they worked, they needed to be compensated. And they should be able to work for their own needs and not for their slave owners. So I think that his friend Aquiano, the other Black gentleman in the movie that was part of the advocacy group, he took him on a tour one time and let him see for himself what the conditions, what deplorable conditions they had. They had this little tiny space where they dwelt for the day, where they slept. And sometimes the journeys were like 3 weeks long at best if it was good weather. And so it was deplorable. And he came back with a more passionate resolve to help these people. So,
yeah, I said the same thing, that his belief that all of God's children were created equal and should be free, I think, is what really motivated and drove him. Even before he started his advocacy, one of the things that stood out is when he was playing poker with those members of parliament, and the one guy didn't have enough money to up his bet, and he was going to bring in his slave. And slave, Wilbur was disgusted with that and just folded and walked out. And then he came back and sang that song Amazing Grace, because and that's before he became an advocate. You could already tell he had that passion in his heart that was not how you treat human beings. And then at one point it also shows him at his home, and he took in stray people all the time and were feeding the needy, and and he treated them like they were equals. He treated anybody like they were equals. And I think that was like his driving passion behind his advocacy, and why he was such a strong advocate for the slave trade and trying to abolish it.
do you remember his wife was already in the kitchen feeding these folks, and then he comes back saying he was going to have a dinner party. He had forgotten, and she reacted like most women would have. The husband say, "Oh, by the way, the boss is coming over."
Yeah.
Forgot to tell you. So
Mm-hmm.
that was,
because he was just, they were always feeding people who needed to be fed, and that you could tell he had that love of God's children in his heart, already. And I don't think he looked down on people based on his position in society. He treated them like they were his equal.
that's true. I thought that he was a very down to earth person. I think by all his senses, feeling the the stale air in that boat in the bottom of the deck, whatever it's called, the hull. I'm not sure what it's called, but and try to imagine his own family there. You could tell that he had that spiritual connection already at the beginning of the movie. I wasn't attuned. I've never seen this movie before. And when he got out of the carriage to see what was taking place, and the guy that was beating up on the horse and
Mhm.
kicking him, I mean, he felt compassion. Gosh, give the horse a break at least an hour. You may be surprised, he might actually
Mhm.
just needs the rest, and he'll work for you. But he felt that men were treated as cargo, um, and that was the case, because even when they went on their journeys, um, the if the boat was really heavy, what they would do, instead of throwing cargo overboard, they would throw the slaves overboard. And
Yeah.
I just can't imagine doing that to a human being.
Yeah. Um, okay, so then I guess the next question in this was, why is the doctrine of family so important to have in your heart, to be passionate and persistent?
You jumped over a couple. Uh, I think it was the driving force, because families are everything that's good and decent in life. You know, if you have a good, solid family, they're really are a powerful force. People notice families that are
Mhm.
together; they just stand out. And he saw. I think he was inspired. He himself didn't have a family yet. He wasn't yet married, but he saw the other families in his circle of friends, in his society, that his macro, his meso uh, connections, and they didn't have any want for anything, and he felt that these families should be entitled. They should be able to experience the same things that his friends had. Uh,
Mhm.
I think he even felt that way about the farmers. I remember reading something about the farmers themselves. They didn't get to, they produced and they work hard, but their masters would take the fruits of their labors. And he felt that it wasn't just the slaves that should benefit from working hard as a family and for their family, not just for the barons. So,
Yeah.
um, and I have,
Well,
go ahead.
and I think like for us as family advocates, like having that doctrine of family like he did is like it's important for us because he had his belief system and that's what made him such a strong advocate, and you saw that his fight was over a course of like 15 years. And so for like us, if we don't have a strong passion in our hearts for the doctrine, or like the doctrine of family, if we don't have that with us, then we're going to waver under the opposition. We're not going to be able to, I mean, the opposition can get loud and degrading. And if we don't have that passion, um, then we're not going to be persistent. And I think one thing that I think is if we have a real true understanding of the family proclamation, that makes us a better family advocate because we know what our divine purpose is here on earth, and that's to protect the families. And if we don't protect the families, then the whole plan of happiness will crumble.
I think you hit it in the nail. From a micro family, we learned how to socialize. We learned about our sexuality, what our roles are in life. We learned work ethics, honesty, just how to be a good model citizen. We learned that from those of us that were born from goodly parents, parents that
Yeah.
do take the time to teach their children. This was the whole plan of a heavenly Father, like you said. That was the plan of salvation, to be reared by good families, and if you have that understanding, then it's a lot easier to go and proclaim and be an advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. Um, and and you're right, from seeing those who from Relief Society, and the sister that went to the United Nations, and that brother, uh,
Mm-hmm.
they had to have a testimony of the mission of motherhood and families, because they took a lot of mocking, a lot of devaluing, like this isn't really important. We're into other issues that are more prevalent in our society, in our changing society. And so I think that you do. You're right. You have to be really strong to be able to withstand um, this the new norms that we're discussing now.
Yeah. All right. So number two, how did Wilbur employ the theoretical approach to become a more effective advocate?
Um, I think he didn't just reach one system; he reached all the systems.
Mm-hmm.
The family, the nucleus of the family, the micro, the meso, the schools, and the working class, the whole their whole society, their whole culture, and even beyond that, he went to Jamaica. He connected with people from France, from England, the colonies. At least that was discussed in the movie. People that were there and connected with him, and so. Um, I think that he wasn't one to condone slavery, but the status quo of his day did. That was very
Mm-hmm.
accepted. So he was going against culture, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult to go against tradition and culture. Um, so, and this was in the 18th century. Um, so I think it really affected all of the systems, and I kind of relate that to our society now. We're downplaying and devaluing the importance of families, of motherhood, of mothers being in the home that
Mm-hmm.
would like to be in the home and that are in positions where they need to be in the home to raise their children. We're now more concerned with the toys, status, with secularism, with education that we are forgetting that one of the most important things within the walls of our home is how we raise our children.
Yeah. I liked that he, in the beginning he had the support of his friends and his family, but you could tell that course of over the years was taking a toll on his physical health, and it seemed like he was like his resolve was weakening, and then he met his wife, and I feel like that was a really good example of using like that microsystem, because she helped become that support that he needed to be an advocate. And I think that, and I that reminded me of that guy, the Sacred Duty book that we read, and how he would call his wife to get that extra support he needed during that time when they were um, fighting those laws and stuff like that at that I don't know what kind of convention he was at, but he was using his wife as that support. And then, he had his friends and he had his community. But then he went further and he used his position in society and in parliament to change, to work to change laws on a government level. And so you can see like how it just broke down, starting with his friends and his family being that support, because the one guy who ended up being prime minister, he's the one who was like, you could do this. He's the one who kind of pushed him, saying like, you have the power, you are the one who could do this, you have the voice. And he needed those support people, and I think pulling from those different systems is what really helped him become more effective. Rather than just using one system, he employed all of those different systems in different ways, um, to strengthen his cause and to strengthen him, because he needed that strength to keep going.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how Barbara Spooner, who was became his wife, what started as a supposed to be a conversation that was kind of the way to get his foot in the door on botany. They
Yeah.
started this heavy conversation on slavery, and and she, even at that point where they had just met, she was like pushing for him. You need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do this. And one other person that was very supportive was that captain that was a slave trade, ran the slave
Yeah.
trade ship.
The one who wrote the song.
His name, John Newton.
Yeah.
Um, and he went in to him once. I guess at one time he was considering to go to become a priest, to get into the ministry. And then when his friend, the prime minister, um, told him, hey, I'm going to get in there and I want you to by my side. I want you to help me. You can do this. And
Mhm.
although he was doing it for political reasons, Wilbur was not. But he,
Right.
can I actually do both? There's no conflict of, conflict between God and the politics. And when he went to talk to the guy that was now a monk, the former captain of the slave ship, um, he really encouraged him, and based on the ghosts that he saw of people that had been killed, all these slaves that was haunting him, and he said, "You need to do this. You need to do this." So he did have people that were encouraging him. He himself, or the people sometimes that encouraged him, like his friend, didn't really want to do anything at that point, but they certainly encouraged him to do it, and that gave him the courage to move forward with that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so number three, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates, what did they do to share their research, and then what evidence did they provide to persuade those opposing on, or those who were opposing or on the fence? Um,
Well,
I
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think he worked really hard to get the evidence, and at one time, they gave him like, okay, you got a year to come up with stuff, and for him to be able to persuade, and I mean, he worked hard. They all together as a group worked, and they had like 390,000 petitions that were signed. He had all these pages of people that wanted to abolish it. He collected stories and testimonials of persons that had worked on the ships, and those that favored the change, all the injustices that were perpetrated. And his very friend Aquiano wrote a book, and he sold thousands
Yeah.
of copies, and that was later used as evidence as the stories of the inhumane treatment of these slaves.
Yeah. And I think one thing that was really, really important for them uh, with their research and trying to persuade those was that field trip that they had those people take with their wives on the boat. And here they are enjoying this nice little boat ride.
Yeah.
And then they spring the slave ship on them and show them what um, what it was like, and made them smell the death and said, don't forget that smell. And I think that was really, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to see it. And I think that was huge because you could talk about the awful conditions, but until you really see it, you're not going to believe it as much. And I think that, like, and then they had the ship captain, he ended up writing his confessions. You had that the former slave, he wrote his experience. They talked to um they visited and talked with slaves. They went to ship doctors and talked about the health and conditions the slaves were under. They did all of these things to just really kind of get the word out to people about what was really happening.
Yeah, there's nothing like all senses experiencing something traumatic like that, because they were high society people. These were people that were contributing to their cause, and they hadn't had any personal contact, excuse me, with uh, with the boat people, I'll call them, that were.
Mm-hmm.
So to them, this was like a real eye opener. Gosh, we
Yeah.
didn't know this was going on. Um, let's see, what I had something in here. Oh yeah, what I like too is that the people that believed in the cause, they had like a moratorium against the barons that had if the slaves were used in the sugarcane fields and they were forced
Mm-hmm.
to work, they refused to buy their sugarcane, their
Yeah,
sugar.
they boycotted.
Yeah, they boycotted it. So I thought that was cool. It's
Mm-hmm.
that they were able to do that. Um,
Okay, so I think number four is, how does the film portray the importance of working together as a group, and what has family advocacy group work taught you? Um, well, I mean, obviously, they all worked together to bring about what was really happening. some of them were traveling to Africa and Jamaica and gathering stories and seeing for themselves what was happening. Some of them were going down to the slave docks where the slave ships were. They were talking to the captains and the doctors and the slaves. They were writing books. They were writing pamphlets. They were preaching in their. There was that one scene where the preacher was preaching in his own church. I mean, they all individually, it seemed like they all individually had their own task, but they were all working together. So everybody was like it's like they were all assigned, things to do to bring about one goal, and they were all working on that one goal. And I think had Wilbur been doing that on his own, he was not going to be as effective because there was just so much work that needed to be done that one person couldn't tackle that job themselves.
Yeah, I think the fact that they share the responsibility and everybody, like, they were talking, we're going to put pictures over here at the church. We're going to post this. We need to contact as many people as possible and spread the word. You work better in numbers because you can delegate responsibilities and you don't duplicate the effort. You have one group taking care of the one getting testimonials, one getting, signatures. And so all the parts come together as a whole. And I think they did that really well.
Well, and I think like this year, just like, because we've had our group meetings every week. And I mean, just like from the readings and the material that we've gone over and then just going over it together as a group, I think it helps to work in a group because one, you support each other, you're all working together on the same cause, but sometimes it helps to have people with fresh ideas and to brainstorm together on what to do. And you have somebody to stand up with against the opposition. And I think, they always say it's like there's safety in numbers or there's strength in numbers. And that's true because how much easier would it have been for them to break Wilbur if he had been alone in his cause, but he wasn't. And he had the strength of his group to support him. And I think that's what working in a group for family advocacy does is it, that also reminds me of that book that we read and how that guy, at first he felt like he was alone when he went to that conference. And then all of a sudden, all these people start coming out of the woodwork saying, where have you been? We've needed someone like you, because they too all felt like maybe they were alone in their cause. And then they were able to work together. And so I think that's really important when it comes to family advocacy is you need a group. You need that strength in numbers.
I thought we were really blessed. We had a really good group where everybody pulled together.
Mm-hmm.
One of the quotes was, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. And I think most of us aren't touched physically, maybe with abuse or domestic violence or some of these things that are very prevalent in some families. But it does affect, at one point, it might not affect us individually in our family. My lifestyle is not going to change much, but when we are involved and seeing what it's doing and how it's destroying the family, or we know friends or go to a domestic violence center or any group that's supported by social services, you see what's happening to families and how they're deteriorating, and that they don't know what is acceptable in a family. What should a family be? How should you treat someone? And it's certainly families were not treated equally during the 1800s. And, thank goodness for people like Wilbur and those that advocated with them and how they were able to break that culture and that unrighteous dominion that they have over these human beings. So it's a good role to be an advocate, but a strong person, I think. I there were times that he probably felt defeated. He just sat there and everybody was clamoring and banging their canes and just he must have gone home some days just feeling really overwhelmed.
Yeah, I imagine he did.
So I guess the next question, are we on 5?
Yeah.
What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in Alma 46? What is a Christian and professional family advocate, and how did Wilbur exemplify that? How can you be an effective and Christ-like? How can you be effective and Christ-like against such loud and often degrading voices? Um, I think there's some really strong parallels with Moroni because um, he stood up for the title of liberty. He stood up for defending faith, family, and freedom. And basically, they're basically the same things that the Wilbur and his advocates were. So, he wanted them to enjoy freedom, to be a free people. Um, they wanted it to be valued. And
Mhm.
go ahead.
Oh no, no, I was just like
Oh,
agreeing. Yeah.
so he was not just concerned over the economic welfare and security of his country or political reasons. He was concerned about families and uniting them and giving them a good life. And it didn't matter that they were VIPs or not; that everyone was entitled to, um, under the umbrella of gospel and Christianity, to have freedoms, such as everybody else was experiencing. Um, So, and
Well,
you know what? That's one of the reasons he went to Christian that had value, to Christian people that were supposed to be Christians, and he tried to emphasize, you're a Christian. I mean, it's not humane. Um, the benefits that we get, it's unjust what we're doing in order to have this economic stability. What we're doing to families and to people. This has to change. And I think at one time I remember him saying, "You will not drown the voice of the people."
mhm.
So that reminded me of Moroni. We
Yeah.
stand for liberty and for our freedoms, for our wives and our children. And what was it? He said, for our wives and our children and our freedoms, freedom of religion. So
Yeah.
he was basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he was basically standing for the same things that Moroni stood for.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, like for us, um, they were both looking for peace for their families and the families of others, like both slaves and those who weren't slaves. And I think like for us to be effective um advocates and having that Christ-like attitude is, you know, it doesn't mean we sink to their level. Being Christ-like and being an advocate, we don't have to um, do the same dirty tricks that our opponents would do. Um, you know, and at the same time, we can use those Christ-like attributes as teaching opportunities to persuade people to our cause. I think it's when we turn away from our Christ-like attributes that we're going to lose. It's using the spirit that will drive our message into the hearts of our listeners. When we become loud and degrading, like our opponent, like those who can be, then we lose the spirit and we lose the reason why we're fighting for what we're fighting for, because we are turning away from the very thing that um, Christ has established here on the earth as families. And we need to have that spirit with us to be effective. I think that, you can listen to two different people speak, and those who have the spirit are far more effective than those who don't.
Yeah, I think it's true. When you don't have the spirit, um, you don't have the empathy for others. You become more hostile, and so how can you influence someone to your way of thinking and persuade them to what you have to offer, that your ideas are good and noble, if you're bashing them, or if you don't find some commonality and to show how there are some benefits to what you are trying to explain and to expound on. So I think the soft heart and the gentleness that you feel when you feel the spirit, the love and
Mhm.
compassion, um,
Yeah.
is missing when you lack the spirit. And so I think it's better to, yeah, it's easier to persuade someone to your way of thinking when you have the gift of the Holy Ghost, when it's helping you, and you're doing it in you're speaking to people in a civilized manner. You
Hmm.
might not agree with their way of doing things or how they're speaking, but if you tone it down and you use love, you know, love always penetrates. It might take a while for some people.
Yeah. Well, and they say contention is of the devil, so you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 6, Marcia. Is it Marcia or Marcia?
Marsha Barlow, I think.
Yeah. She spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. And did Wilbur and others amplify any of her ideas, and how so? Um, my first thought right off the bat was when they were at that dinner party where Wilbur was being introduced to those people for the very first time. And they stood up and they demonstrated the purpose of the shackles on the boats.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and then would talk about how it was so disgusting, but how they would stand there in their own urine and feces for weeks, and people would die and they would just leave them chained up dead, and they would spend all that time on the boats. And to me, that was very effective, um you know way of persuading people to follow your cause. And then they did that again when they did the boat demonstration where they visually showed them the shackles and the smell. And so I think using that visual along with some of the stories and the personal accounts really helped Wilbur and his group be effective in getting people to join their cause. Because I mean, I was like disgusted listening to it. And you can picture it in your mind. And I think that makes it very effective when you can paint a picture in somebody's mind of what it's really like.
I remember him making the comment that um, when he brought the chains out, um, and this was at the dinner table where they, in his home where what was it? The African person, one of the advocates, I forget, Iquana. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, yeah, and this was for the neck, and this was for the arms and the hands, and by the way, this was to keep them from jumping overboard. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes they were useless anymore. They've exerted all their energy. Of course, they don't get fed really well, and they still were expected to be productive. And some of them would just assume die, and they
Yeah.
didn't even die in peace. Yeah, one of the things that he did to persuade them is he complimented them and talked about things that they could relate to. Like he said, "You are men of humanity."
Mm-hmm.
Pled with them, and he painted the picture of the suffering slaves, and he said, "Not changing conditions for the African slave degrades and insults the quality of our natures." And he pled with.
Yeah.
He also mentioned that this boat that just arrived in the dock. Well, it started out with 600 men, women, and children, and
Yeah.
and they ended with 200 souls. So I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people, you know, to have die, and it was deplorable, and I it made me sad to watch this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he he
Yeah.
he was kind of forceful at times though because he was passionate. Um, he um, he reminded them also of the French. Hey, the French. You know what? They believe in abolishing it. They don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But people in Parliament, the Lords, were saying, "Yeah, but you know what? It might just be a coy, and then they're going to benefit if we bail out. Then they're going to take our place, and
Yeah.
and make the money that we're not going to make." He also mentioned about the um, the American. There were 80% of those ships now were raising the American flag, and do we want to have to search and seize those? Do we have
Right.
the capacity to do that? So and it was a resounding 60 nay votes and 282, I believe, yeses in favor to end the slave trade. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like you said, this wasn't done overnight or after a year or once he produced his evidence. It just took years to change the minds and the hearts of the people for
Yeah.
the cause of freedom. So, um, number 7, should we move on or?
Yeah.
You know,
Um,
what role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? And did you see their political system being pro family? Why or why not? Answer all of the questions. Hmm.
um, well, first of all, I mean, I did see how religious freedom was allowed to use to fight against the slave trade because they were able to preach in their churches, and there were preachers who were part of the movement to abolish slave trade. Um, uh, I I personally did not see if I did not see their political system being pro family if you're centering it around the slave trade basically, because I felt like they did not care what happened to those families of the slaves. They didn't care that they were ripping these men, women, and children away from their families and away from their homelands and selling them into slavery. I mean, and I'm pretty sure even if they took a whole family into the slave trade, once they got to their destination, they probably sold them all off into separate places. They didn't care. To them, the slaves were just a commodity. They were not a person with a family, so yeah, I don't think that they were pro family in that political system at all.
I totally agree. I don't. It was all about power, about politics, about
Money.
in the country and using them for their purposes. And I remember at one time, um, Wilbur was speaking about they are people, they're human, and everybody like what? You know,
Yeah.
you know they weren't seen. You're right. They were absolutely right. They weren't seen as people, and their major concern was, well, what about our constituents? You know,
Mm-hmm.
that put us in office. Um, we don't want to disappoint them. You know, and because they enjoyed that socialization, the financial profits from their businesses, so they didn't want to rock the boat, as they say. Um, this was a hard thing for him to sell and to kind of change the whole system. Um,
Well, because yeah, they also were saying that it was going to break down their financial like country. They said their country was built on the backbones of slaves, and so we're the greatest country in the world, and we need slaves to be the greatest country. So it was really a hard fight to fight against.
yeah, I think um, you know they brought a lot of products in those plantations, and I've seen
Mm-hmm.
plantations, and I've seen in some countries like in Mexico how primitive. They still some places they don't have tractors, and they use the old pioneer, you know, to make furrows, those metal things that you know to make
Yeah.
the plant and all that. And they didn't have the machinery and the technology that we now have. These people work from morning to night,
Mm-hmm.
um, just deplorable conditions. So they weren't pro family. I didn't. He was probably the only one talking about their families, and the only part of family that the the House of the, what they call it, the House of Common or the House of Lords spoke about is their constituents. That was their family,
Yeah.
and how this would really change if they didn't support these barons and these VIP people who were bringing in money from the slaves. They wouldn't be able to enjoy the society that they enjoyed. I mean, the theater and the gambling, and this was what helped support them, and also their king.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this was we can't do that to our king. You know, we're a great nation, and it would, like you said, this would really ruin our economy.
Yeah. Um.
It's all about investments.
Yeah. So the next one was, did you think he used his time well on earth and showed the elements of consecration? And I felt like he did. I felt like he used his position, his wealth, in society to fight many battles of injustice. I mean, at the end of the movie, it mentioned how, I mean, yeah, he won the slave trade, but he went on to fight other injustices. He was well educated, so he used his education to help him fight his cause. He used his Christian beliefs and put those into action. I think he took everything that God had given him and used it his entire life to fight. And it said at the very end that he fought up until he died for injustices that he found in the world. So
you're right. He continued with health issues. He continued with education, for all people. And not only, like I said, not only for the slaves, but for the common people, that they should be able to enjoy the fruits of their labors.
mm-hmm.
So I think that they were with that society, the Society of Enoch. Let me see. Let me get a question. Oh, we're not there yet. With the law of consecration, they were they were knit in mind and heart. Everything
Yeah.
was common between them. There was no rich or poor, black or white. They all worked together to establish the city of Zion. And,
Yeah.
and I think he worked towards that. I don't know that he accomplished it completely to his satisfaction, but he certainly liberated people that were enslaved before, and
Yeah.
gave their children a better opportunity for education, for better health. He was one that treated others as his equal. I mean, remember the scene with he and the butler were sitting there? I mean, VIPs don't
Yeah.
really sit with their butlers, they have their own quarters. Uh,
Yeah.
and when he was going to see the former Captain Newton, there was a slave, I'm not a slave, but a peasant there who, only had a torso and was begging, and he readily took money, and he didn't look at him with contempt.
Right.
He freely gave. So that's what constitutes being of one heart and one mind. Um, you sacrifice and you look for the welfare of others, not just yourself.
Yeah.
You want them to share in your wealth. So I thought that was really noble.
Yeah, I did too. All right. So, any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that related to family advocacy?
Um, I just thought that inhumane. I mean, and you read that throughout history. The Israelites, the Egyptians, and how they treated the Jews. So I think when we become more secular, more wealthy, we become more impressed with ourselves, our accomplishments, our knowledge, and that we kind of forget um, those who have not had the same opportunities that we have had. We become arrogant and what's the word I'm looking for? Um, when you feel like you're better than others and you're superior to others, condescending. Um, so to me, I saw them making merry in their theaters, gambling, enjoying the outdoor sports, womanizing, when they should have been more concerned with more serious matters like the slavery, the representing their people that they were so concerned about. Um,
Mm-hmm.
their constituents. They should be working there to meet the needs of their people instead of their own lust. Um, to brand people like cattle,
Yeah.
it's just miserable conditions. So I think
Well, I
that
found it interesting that they mentioned how Wilbur stopped going to the gambling hall with the other members of parliament when he took up the fight against the slave trade. So I feel like he was using his time more wisely, um, and not engaging in those kinds of riotous activities anymore. And he was, putting his time and effort to fighting his cause. Um, and I kind of feel like he lived what he preached by the way he treated his own servants. He treated the less needy. The way he treated animals. He lived what he preached. He wasn't just giving lip service. He really was fighting for something he believed in. Um, okay, number 10. What was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed?
Oh, having raised most of my life pretty much LDS, except for a few years when I was, small, my teen years. Um, I've always thought the family was important, and I learned that from the people I associate with, my family, aunts and uncles and cousins. So the family has always been important to me, but I think I was more concerned over the welfare of my own family as compared to, and it should be, your family comes first. Take care of your family. But then once you're in a position where you're providing for your family, your needs are being met, then, as President Hinckley said, we stay on higher ground and we're lifted, then we need to lift and bring others, give them the warmth and the comfort and that they deserve and they need. So I feel more like, gosh, yes, I can do this. I can use more of my time when I'm done with school and not have more time when I retire too. But in little ways, I can serve it in my community. Um, when
Yeah.
when the church asks for volunteers, like here in California, we've had such terrible fires and mudslides that our stake is still asking for volunteers. You know, we need so many people to go and help. You know, can you volunteer? And domestic violence center. There's all kinds of places where I feel that I'm more cognizant now that yeah, maybe I haven't been working around this particular environment as much, but I've learned enough where I can feel more comfortable to advocate and to help out. What do I need to do? Where am I needed? So your mind becomes more open to helping others and going beyond your own family circle and your circle of friends, but helping those that really will not be able to return the favor.
Yeah. Yeah, because I kind of like at the beginning was just felt like, not the family advocacy was just kind of like, oh, my own little world, my own little family, maybe my own little community, but you get out and you vote, um but then it's, but I also grew up in a very political family where politics is talked about all the time. And um you know my dad, family home evening lessons, when we grew up, we'd have a spiritual lesson, but then we'd also do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and we'd have a history lesson because they felt like it was really important for us to learn. I remember we went one Sunday after church, we went to protest an abortion clinic that was being opened up. They didn't open it up, but I remember that was our family Sunday activity, was going and protesting an abortion clinic. And so, that's how I was raised, and I've taken my kids to go do things like that. But you know, I just kind of felt like with advocacy, it was just kind of doing those little things, but you can do more. You can start with your family, you start with your, and then move on, move into your community, and then move into your local government, and you can build on that. And that's something I think I learned over the course of the semester, was like going outside of just my family and teaching my kids, but moving into the community and moving into my local government and being an advocate.
I really remember reading that, you posting that, and I thought, wow, how awesome. Do you feel that with the climate of how things are, the liberals and the conservatives and fighting against abortion, would you feel comfortable taking your child to one of those rallies now?
Now,
Yeah,
things are different than, I mean, that was, gosh, 20, 25 years ago. Um, it's a little bit different now. People are a lot more violent.
more aggressive. Yeah.
And, it's like, do I want to expose my children to that nasty side or not? I do now. A few years ago, I did take my kids to a couple times to a couple of those tea parties um, that the conservatives were having, but those were really peaceful. And
Uh-huh.
um, I do think it's important,
Hmm.
like, to teach my kids, like, about politics and about standing up for what you believe in and things like that. Taking them to something so controversial, maybe now that they're teenagers, yes. When they were little, probably not. But I mean, you can't hide them from that ugly side of the world. I think we have to teach them how to deal with that ugly side of the world. And you are going to have people who aren't going to like your beliefs, and they're going to be mean and nasty about it. And I think we got to teach them how to respond in a Christ-like way and not sink to their level, and just maintain your beliefs without turning mean and nasty as well. And that's also, that leads into number 11. That's also kind of what I feel like has taught me, like, benefiting from this class, is how to help my children be more involved in the politics and in rallies and standing up for what they believe in, to maintain good government.
Yeah, yeah, your children. There's no greater influence than your example. I mean, like you and your family, your parents left you a legacy. I mean, you're patriotic. You're passing that on to your children now. I mean, the Pledge of Allegiance, a family harmony. And I think that's, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Do you even have the Pledge of Allegiance anymore in school? Do you know?
No, I know.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I used to think, advocacy, I don't want to get that into it. There's people that maybe are really good for those political things and rallies and all that. I don't consider myself. I can be very opinionated, and I can stand for what I believe and that I'm passionate about. But now I feel like, why can't I do this? Of course I can do it. You're really helping God's children, and you're making it in a small way, a little better place for somebody. And like that starfish, the guy asked, well, there's thousands of starfish on the sand. There's no way you're going to make a difference or, change their life, or you're not going to be able to save them all. And what did the guy say? But if I can, it made a whole lot of difference to this one.
Yeah.
Fish that I threw. And that's the way I think we can look as advocates. We can look at, if I can change one life. And one thing that I've learned too, by going to the domestic violence and the 40-hour course that I had to take and stuff, associating with people that aren't in my church. And some of them have the religious beliefs, some of them don't, but they're good people who want to empower women and make changes, help them make good changes in their lives. So I think that's one of the reasons that I would want to advocate and get.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you find that you share more? I share more with my family, even my coworkers. Oh, guess what I learned to do? Did you know that this was going on? The United Nations and that, and so I strike conversations. I have no idea, so this class has helped me to promote more family value. And I have to be really careful in where I work, because, we can't speak a lot of political things or say, well, I'm for the straight family and blah, blah, blah. And because then I also work with some gay folks. So, I have to be really careful and respectful of them. But I also believe in the traditional family.
Yeah.
Here, if you didn't have a mom and dad.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I think we started at a quarter after.
Yeah. So I think we hit about a little over 45 minutes.
Okay. So anyway, I also have that my children all served missions. They attended BYU. They surrounded themselves in their environment with the gospel. And so all of these things imprinted with them. Some of them are not active right now, but I feel that was a real fiber and growing up that they grew up with. So I think as a result, they reach out to other people in their community, and their neighbors, and I really attribute that to the gospel.
Yeah.
So, if we're all done,
all right,
we'll conclude this, and I will send her the link, and then don't forget we have to evaluate each other, so we have to send that. So I'm going to stop the broadcasting.
Okay.
Can you hang on just a moment?
Okay.